Well, good afternoon. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Peyton Inge. I'm one of Charles's children. And so on behalf of the Inge family, we want to welcome all of you all here today. And you're here because in some ways Charles touched, as I would call him Charles touched your lives, but you also touched his. And because you did touch his, you touched ours as well. And so we wanted to have this time to really share some of the things in our lives and our experiences with you, and that some of you are going to share with us some of the things that you experienced with him, and hopefully be a blessed time for all of us. And so to start off, I'd like to have my son Travis come up and start us off in the Lord's Prayer.
Thank you all for coming tonight. And y'all are welcome to join along with me. I think most of us are familiar with the Lord's Prayer, but it was originally given on the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus told his followers how to pray. But it's Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this daily bread. Forgive us not our trespasses, as we forgive our who trespass against us. For thine is the power. That's why I need notes.
You have just discovered that we are not perfect. And Jana reminds me of that occasionally. Anyway, I want to share, I'm going to try and stand here, be still. Some of the experiences that I had in our family growing up, and I'll start off with this, is that in our family, it was somewhat to me like living in America. You know, it was not perfect, but I cannot imagine being anywhere else. And we grew up, it started off on the family farm that belonged to my grandparents, 5 miles outside the city limits of Dallas. And of course, that gave us lots of opportunities that I guess you don't normally have if you grow up in the city. But with all the wild animals, the chickens, the pigeons, the horses, and whatnot, I lost privileges on horses after my second concussion, and I just couldn't stay on them like my sister could. But it was an incredible experience, and one that just, it's hard to describe living there. And of course, today the city limits and the homes go 30 miles north of where we were. That's just how things have grown here. But you know, you saw in some of the books that my dad wrote, the poetry, and when we were growing up, I have to admit, I didn't really know much about that side of him, the poetry in the sense of the written verbiage, if you want to call it that. But I saw it in a different way, because I think for him, the poetry was something like, let me back up. When you're in business, the details matter. The question is not as important as the answer is. You've got to know the facts or you're in trouble. And yet, I think the poetry was for him was somewhat like an impressionist painting, where the details are not as important as the emotion and helping someone feel get with the sense of it and challenge your imagination. And so I didn't see the written, but I saw it in the things that he took us to do. We'd go during when the creeks were at flood stage. He got inner tubes and put tubs in them, and we'd go floating down them. And these are things you can't do anymore today. People would be horrified. But it was an incredible experience, because it taught us to be afraid of nothing, challenged us to look, to seek and to look after everything. And yet he loved nature, and he saw the pictures with the dog and other things. He loved animals. He loved everything that God made. And while we were raised in the church at a young age, my dad didn't really himself come to terms with that until a week before he passed. And I'll talk about that later. But it was truly an incredible experience growing up. And I am so thankful for it, and the experiences with Joe, the fossil hunts that we went on. And it was just... It was really time spent with him doing some things, even though it was limited. It was still the times and the experiences. He was not intimidated by anyone. I remember he was the first person I ever heard of that Jan will hate me for telling this, but he bought a hearse before it was the thing to do with the hippies. And he paid $300 for it, which was the price of the new tires. And that's what the family went camping with. And this is for someone who could afford anything he wanted to. He was very frugal. And we drove all over Texas and Arkansas and Louisiana in that thing, camping. And when someone made fun of it, he actually, back then you could do it, he arranged to buy one for them on their money out of their bank account, and then challenged them to a race. And they shut down Addison Airport. If you're not familiar with Dallas, it's a pretty big deal now. But they shut down Addison Airport in '63 so we could have a hearse race. So a very different experience than I guess some people enjoy, but it was a wonderful experience. Like I said, there were difficult times, but there were incredible times, and really, so we miss him. But this is part of life. This is the one thing we're guaranteed of, is that we're not going to be here forever. And so I think part of it is seeing all this, is it's teaching me to value whatever time I have left, to value it and make the most of it. And if I may, I want to share one last experience I had with him, and this was, I guess, less than 2 weeks before he passed. I got the call. He was in the ICU unit, and I went down there, and of course Dominique was already there. But I thought we were down for the count. Totally unresponsive, and I thought we were done. But that was on a Thursday evening, I guess it was. But Friday evening, things a little bit better. He couldn't hear what he was saying. He was trying to say something. You weren't sure couldn't understand what it was, and he was in and out. But Thursday, I guess Friday night began against that something was going to change, and so I needed to be there Saturday. Interesting. God just gave him another chance. As I said, we were raised in the church, but it didn't. This issue of who Jesus really is, whether he's a lunatic liar or really who he claimed to be. A lot of people don't come to terms with that. We go to church, we think about it. My brother figured it out in high school. It didn't hit me until my 20s, and my dad was one of those kind of wrestled with it. Could you give me my Bible, please? And I'll read you something that I think Saturday morning it finally hit him, or I guess maybe Saturday afternoon. It was really interesting. Thanks. Thank you. Here you go, sweetie. Thank you. I know that everyone's very patient. I want to read you a verse that I think finally came home to him at that time, because let's read it to you. This is out of Romans chapter 10. It says, "For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. For not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they didn't subject themselves to the righteousness of God." I think it hit him that's where he was. And that the next part, I'll skip down to verse 9, it says, "That if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. For with the heart man believes, resulting in salvation, and with the mouth he confesses, first in righteousness, and he confesses, resulting in salvation." And he did that, and it was amazing. His speech began to return. At first, it was difficult at first, but he was himself, the release and this from knowing that he had finally dealt with something that he'd never been wanting to address the answer to all his life. Something changed. And he was so excited, he insisted on calling Jana, my wife, to sing happy birthday to her, because that was her birthday. And I talked to her later. She said, in one sense, I could not understand a word he said, but at the same time, I did understand every word that he said. And then he wanted to call the rest of the family members and tell them how much he loved them. And we spent the next 30 hours in the ICU unit singing songs with family members and whatnot, and calling people, because he didn't want to go to bed. His facilities were all coming back, and the last time I really saw him healthy was that Sunday when we got home. Like I said, we've been up for over 30 hours straight, just talking. Tears, a lot of laughter, just talking about things in life that we experienced in the family. And the irony of it is, the last thing he really said to me, seriously, was at the house when we left. Everybody standing around. He was sitting there drinking champagne and having pomegranates, like nothing had happened. And he said, "Peyton." I said, "What?" He says, "That was fun." And I see you, unit. You're nearly dead, and that was fun. Something had happened and something had changed, and it was the most incredible experience, one that I'll never forget, and that I'm very thankful for. And so, anyway, I'll end with that, and my sister Jenny is going to come and read some things that some of the family members have written. But again, thank you for all of you coming and for what you've imparted into my dad's life, into Dominique's, and therefore into ours, because as you change him, you've changed us. So thank you so much.
Well, we all have stories that dovetail with each other, and certainly growing up on a farm was a remarkable experience. So Charles gave me lots of things, but growing up on a farm, teaching problem solving, building forts, using tools. I was 5 years old and wanted a rabbit, and he said, well, if you have a rabbit, you have to have a rabbit cage, and handed me a hammer. So, of course, I didn't really build the cage by myself, but I certainly thought I had, or at least thought I had helped. And to give a lifetime of confidence about doing things on one's own was an incredible gift. And the education of Hockaday and SMU I'm grateful for every day, every day. Charles gave me Frisbee. But when I was a child, they had not come up with the commercial Frisbees yet. And he called them Winston-Salems. And they were always rusty paint cans or metal can lids about this big. And we'd see who could get them the furthest across a creek. And I think I went all the way through SMU in a Mighty Thor t-shirt playing Frisbee. Graduated in 3 years, but it was because of the education he provided both at the farm and at school. Tubbing is something Anderson references in his story that I'll tell in a minute. Tubbing was number 3 wash tubs in big truck inner tubes with a little piece of 2x4 and a bent air stem so that it wouldn't break, and with old ping pong paddles or bolo paddles, we would float down White Rock Creek. And if you just pushed one paddle, boy, you'd really spin. We're not quite sure why he thought it was a good idea to go down White Rock Creek when it was flooding. It had just risen 30 feet, but somehow we survived. So I will read what Anderson, our brother who lives in London, has written. He said, we have all appreciated the poetry that gave Charles so much gratification to write. Charles was also a wizard at creating poetic events, and he has performed this magic for most of us here. These events were not so much theatrical as they were real and wonderful celebrations of the physical world we share. As often as not, the events Charles would conjure up were well outside modern health and safety guidelines. Tubbing down White Rock Creek at high flood, night sailing on White Rock Lake, and hearse racing down Runway 1 at Addison Airport come to mind. Horse racing might seem slightly more likely, but indeed it was hearse racing. Many memories naturally stem from the basic circumstance of our home growing up on a farm, shared with Charles's parents along with the families of his 2 sisters. This Inge commune gave us endless accomplices and audiences throughout our youth. These in themselves were great gifts. One summer when I was approaching 12, Charles took me and himself on a special driving trip to Colorado. We made the trip in the family's blue Buick Vista Cruiser station wagon. To a 12-year-old at the time, the Vista Cruiser had the cachet nearly of a lunar lander, because of one key feature, a dedicated skylight just over the back seat where the kids were usually parked. Imagine 12 years old with your own view to heaven, or conversely, an additional portal for that watchful eye from heaven as some may see it. The Vista Cruiser also had additional strip skylights on either side of the back stowage area where the tribe so often went feral. Yes, correct, no safety belts back there, and again, substandard by modern health and safety protocol, but fair go back then and scenic to the point of exotic. On the roof of the car above the stowage area between the kids' feature skylight and the side skylights was the roof luggage rack, having chrome rails all around. Vista Cruiser was the perfect name for this station wagon. For the final leg of our journey, we found ourselves at the Maroon Bells, a pair of particularly photogenic peaks about 12 miles southwest of Aspen, Colorado. Charles had had an eventful afternoon already. After thoughtfully mentoring me on the harmlessness of bees, demonstrating how gently to redirect them, he was rewarded with a powerful sting. But he bounced back quickly, and we shared a beautiful long afternoon taking a walk towards the peaks and back along the stream in the flats of the foreground. Charles had many outstanding qualities. He was adept at avoiding conflict, which is a great skill on long family journeys, and he was equally skilled at getting his way, which could be annoying if you even realized what had happened. On another level altogether, he would often surprise and delight with special acts of thoughtful creativity. So it was this afternoon in 1967, as the sun was going down on our day, and our trip had taken on a layer of that Sunday night kind of low that school kids know all too well. What a wonderful antidote for me when Charles offered, "Would you like to ride down on top?" No way, but yes way. We had about 1,000 vertical foot descent ahead of us from the Maroon Bells to the valley where our motel was, and I was going to get to do it on top of the Vista Cruiser. Charles always liked a degree of unpredictability in adventures, so this descent would be done coasting in neutral, like sledding. This would be quieter and offer that subtle extra feeling of natural acceleration on an incline. The driver would have to arrest the increasing speed rather than feed it. Seated on top of the Vista Cruiser, I was enthroned. Holding onto the chrome luggage rail in front of me like reins, Charles gave a quick visual once-over to judge if I would be sensible, climbed in, confirmed with a verbal, slipped it into neutral, and released the brakes. Very, very slowly at first, it began to crawl forward. I could see down through the skylight to my empty seat. I had been transported. I was transcendent. Aspen trees lining the smooth, narrow two-lane with only the sound and feel of the frigid mountain air. The trees regularly closing in tight, only to offer great space at the next meadow, then squeezing tight to the road again. The car magically hugging the curves, back and forth across the central white line, dipping into the chicanes, left, then right, then left, mile after gorgeous mile. It is a simple memory, really, of a simple, thoughtful gift of a poetic moment, given by a father to a son. After a beautiful afternoon, I was flown back to Earth, piloted by my father, more ready than ever to take off to the future. I feel wealthy with memories of growing up with my special siblings under the adventurous guidance of our father, Charles. And here's the Vista Cruiser. And then this sweet note is from our sister-in-law, Sister Linda, who is married to our brother, Bob, who died just a few weeks before Charles did. But she's always been totally a part of the family. I have so many memories of Charles that I wish I could share, but the one I've chosen is the one that will always stand out as the most special to me. It was the last time I spoke with Charles, a couple of days before his passing, when he called me from the hospital. Even in his weakened condition, in which I strained to hear every word, his voice was joyful, even excited. Some of his words were hard to understand, but I clearly understood most of them. Part of what he said was, "I love you, Linda. I always have." What a wonderful memory, last memory to hold in my heart from a father-in-law who can say with equal emotion, "I love you, Charles. I always have."
Thank you, Jenny. All right. Ken Hackett, who's a friend of the family's, do you want to say something to us? Friend and neighbor, Mr. Hackett.
Friend and neighbor, yeah. Well, thank you. When Dominique asked me to speak today, I wasn't sure what to say, but she didn't say, "You're going first." So, not fair. But Yeah, I was going to try to wing this a little bit, but I decided that that wouldn't work. So I wrote some things down, and I hope I get it right. I want to thank you for asking me. It is an honor to speak about Charles, our friendship. And what a marvelous day it was when I drove into town. It was a high sky, wispy clouds, and I thought of him. He taught me a lot about that part of our little burg of Granbury, observing the nature as much as possible. And surely the angels are rejoicing with us as we gather today and in this beautiful church. I want y'all to know I wore this blue bandana on Charles's behalf because I do believe that blue might have been his favorite earthly color. The blue sky he pointed to regularly, the blue water of the lake he loved so dearly. And so I wore that for him, and I'll always think of him when I do so again. But probably his favorite color most likely would be the colors in your garden, Dominique. He wrote about it often, and it was a wonderful thing to see in his book. I can't exactly tell you and my friends here in Granbury when I actually met Charles and Dominique. I always say Charles and Dominique because they were inseparable. Every time I saw Charles, I saw Dominique, every time, except when you were walking Brindle in the early mornings. So it's kind of like that. When I say Charles, I can't think of him without thinking of her. So thank you. And if I have any sorrow today, it would be because their love for one another is now not present today, but it will never be forgotten and certainly never lost. Although I knew of Charles and his building project before I met them formally, I knew their builder, and he showed me the house he was building for them, and it was spectacular, of course, but it was so tastefully done, just like Charles and Dominique do all things. So, but I do remember the first time I met them, it was on a very, very important subject, the location of a dumpster. It's true. It is true. My partner and I had bought the Granbury Old Methodist Church, and by change of use and what we were going to use it, the city is going to require us to put a dumpster in. And so, knowing that the quality of the home next door, I called them and asked them to meet with me and about the location I had kind of picked out. And quickly they agreed with me that away from their house, away from their bedroom, because those trucks come here awful early, and screened nicely with stone would be an okay location. So thank you for agreeing to that too, Dominique. It worked well, although the dumpster world, it gives me fits every event we have there. Now, so that was the beginning of our friendship. And it went very fast, I thought, and I think most good friendships do. It goes fast. We get to know each other quickly. We have no inhibitions. We talk, we laugh, we kid each other, and we move on, and that's the way it was. But we mostly talked about civic issues and events and what I was doing, what he was kind of planning on doing, and mostly the future of Granbury and how to affect positive change, because that was, I think, the real calling of Charles, to affect other people's lives, and certainly he affected myself and many others that knew him and grew to love him. He was a soft-spoken, humble man, and he always had a friendly wave and a smile as he drove by in his Volvo station wagon. Nothing reminds me more of the humility of that man of driving by in his Volvo station wagon. He could have driven anything he wanted to, kind of like the story you had about the hearse. But he could have bought a camper, he could have bought an RV, he bought a hearse. It was efficient, it was cost effective, it did the job, and that's what he was about. But later in life, or later in years, I learned more about his stellar business career, and how well he had done and how he'd done so many other good things. But as the time passed, I valued his love for our lake and our river and his property behind us. Really, he had the front door. We just had the back door. And one day, this is how silly he was, he called me to his house and of all things asked me to run for mayor. And I looked at him and I was flattered, I really was, but I said, he was right, but I didn't do it. I was moving out of town, and as I said, I was flattered, but he was right at the time. Friends, what I want to tell you, what set Charles apart from my perspective was his philanthropy through the Inge Foundation. To say that he was a man of substance would not give the word substance justice. No, he was and forever will be a man of stature and a man of quality. He never looked for the limelight, I can assure you that, but he's always the first one to come to the rescue of a project or aid a city official or whatever was needed, and first to write the check. And that was what I knew him to be, the first to do what's good for the city and our community, especially when it came to the arts. Which brings me to another substance of him that I learned to love and grow knowledge of in his art of sculpting and poetry. Yes, I would tell you folks that Charles Inge was a Renaissance man of many levels. Well, and for what it seems to me, nature had captured his soul while Dominique, obviously, his heart. One cannot look at one of his driftwood sculptures or read one of his poems not to see where his love of life, his love of his wife and family, his fellow man, and his community emanated from, his love of nature. So, hopefully I don't steal somebody's thunder that I see later in the program. I got a couple of his poems I'd like to read that spoke to me. And the first is called Two Chairs. It goes like this: 2 chairs on an old front porch, 2 chairs at the river's edge, 2 chairs at a roadside places here and there, or our 2 chairs at Bluffside here. It's 2 chairs side by side everywhere. What a fuss we make about life, trying to get it all figured out. Where to stand, where to sit, trying to get to the nub of it. And those 2 chairs sitting there so plainly show what it's all about. I don't think it's not too hard to figure out what and who he was writing that about and with. So thank you, Dominique. The other is called Realms. This touched me pretty. Yesterday, a moth flailing with its wings at a window glass of an old tool shed loose scales like dust from a chitinous structure of its wings, dooming itself to helplessness and prey. Not 4 feet away, the tool shed door stood ajar, but the insect was fixed on light. Its plight, in some respect, similar to our own. By ancient patterns, we struggle to find our ways. As the moth, its set's pattern took aim on light. An open door stands near at hand, simply or beyond our realms of sight. I thought of that when you told me about the last 30 hours. He figured it out. Praise God. So I want to leave you with one last thing. There's an old country western song by Vince Gill, and it's a eulogy he wrote about his brother passing. And the second stanza goes like this: Go rest high on that mountain. Son, your work on earth is done. Go to heaven a-shouting love for the Father and the Son. I know I will, but we will all shout with you and all miss you, Charles Inge. And though he may not admit it, Charles Inge was a cowboy at heart. Long live cowboys.
Thank you, Ken. We appreciate it. Janice Hort.
Is anyone going to tell of how Charles proposed to Dominique and what was going on? There's a lawnmower involved, right? Okay. So, discussion for the reception. There you go. I'm Janice Horrock with Tarleton State University, and for 14 years I served as the director at the Langdon Center Neighbors. So I'm very pleased to be able to bring to you a message from Dominic and Lisette D'Ottavio. Dominique, Peyton, Anderson, Jenny, we consider it a great privilege and honor to have the opportunity to reflect on your extraordinary husband and father, a person we considered a dear friend, a distinguished community servant, and a gentleman's gentleman. We first met Charles at our inaugural Langdon Review weekend. Both Dominique and Charles were extraordinarily gracious to the new kids on the block. We quickly realized that here was a remarkable couple who not only shared a passion for the arts, education, environment, and community, but who were also deeply in love and complemented each other beautifully. To paraphrase a saying related to something they dearly loved, these two birds that were meant to flock together. Not long after our first meeting, Charles gave us a copy of his recently expanded Brazos View collection. We especially enjoyed his poems about the Brazos River. Charles' poetry is colorful, insightful, and thought-provoking. It gave us a deeper understanding of his appreciation for life, the beauty and complexity of nature, and why the Brazos house was not only a home, but also a reflection of Charles' passion for the intersection of the arts, science, and literature. Clearly, Charles understood and lived the timeless principle of one of our favorite authors, Aldo Leopold. The first rule of intelligent tinkering is to know that all things are connected. Over the years, we came to appreciate not only Charles's poetry and breadth and depth of knowledge, but the man himself. Charles was genuinely interested in learning about our experiences at Tarleton, our travels, our family, our opinions about environmental issues, and even politics. Charles was a role model for lifelong learning. He was never satisfied to just let life roll by. Quite the contrary. He was always engaged, kept his mind sharp, enjoyed lively and even controversial conversations, and frequently displayed a reserved sense of humor that brought smiles to everyone who was privileged to spend time with him. On our first visit to Brazos House, we learned that Charles was not only a poet and philanthropist, but an artist, gardener, and naturalist as well. He gave us a delightful tour of the Brazos Gardens, where we saw the perfect blending of a natural landscape with small gardens and walking paths to the river. We even had the chance to admire his pile of driftwood that he quite remarkably used to craft his wonderful walking sticks. From the art gallery that serves as their living room, we learned about his work with the Brazos River Conservation Coalition and the eclectic memorabilia Dominique and Charles collected on their travels and from favorite artists. There was a special story for each piece of art. No story was more endearing than the one he told as he held the bust that Dominique had sculpted. He was an unassuming man who never sang his own praises, but always applauded the accomplishments of others, especially his beloved bride, Dominique. Last spring, we had the opportunity to spend several months at the Inge's boathouse. As we settled into our temporary home on the Brazos, Charles's endearing and inspiring presence was felt in every corner of this magical cabin. From the coins he personally hammered into the stair railings to the diverse collection of art, nature, history, and fiction books, to the Scott and Stuart Gentling Birds of Texas prints that graced the walls, we were reminded of the profound influence that family and community had on this exceptional man. Our appreciation for his commitment to enriching the lives of those around him and his community grew enormously. Charles has truly created a legacy that will impact future generations for countless generations to come. Although Charles may be known for his successful career as a builder, developer, real estate broker, investor, conservationist, artist, and philanthropist, we will always think of him as the consummate gentleman's gentleman who enriched our lives and those of thousands of others. It has been one of the greatest pleasures of our lives to have known such a remarkable man. I'm only going to take a few moments longer. So when I opened up my copy of Brazos View, this fell out, and it was from Brazos View, An Evening of Poems by Charles Inge. And the program was 3 simple parts: the gathering, the reading, and the lingering. And with Charles, he was always good when there was lingering, because he gave you his time. So Ken, you read some poems, and you chose country music. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm going to go with the Great American Songbook and a standard by Hoagie Carmichael. So I'm going to blend and let you linger in the visuals that Charles created and how well they do blend with Hoagie Carmichael's Stardust. Breathe deep. A spring shower has just passed. Brazos View is fragrant and pristine. Earth and air smell fresh and clean. Purple irises stand tall in an oaken bucket, placed lakeside, the kingfisher chattering as it rushes by just beyond our dock. A turtle is up for air. A pair of sparrows gathers nesting grass. Brindle and I stand, watch, and breathe deep. And now the purple dusk of twilight time steals across the meadows of my heart. High up in the sky, the little stars climb, always reminding me that we're apart. You wander down the lane and far away, leaving me a song that will not die. Love is now the stardust of yesterday, the music of the years gone by.
Thank you, Janice. Sandy Horton. There we go.
I just met Charles a few years ago at the Langdon Review weekend, and he was reading poetry. And I love to listen to him read. His eyes twinkle, and he smiles. His whole body smiles when he reads, and it just makes you feel so good. So when I was sitting in the auditorium or in the concert hall at Langdon, I heard music when he was reading, and so I wrote down the notes as he read, because he had a little lilting rhythm as he read his words. And then when I got back to my hotel room, I played it on a native flute, and I liked it. So I'm going to play it for you today. This is what Charles sounds like to me when he reads his poetry. I found out Charles died last summer, I wrote him a poem called Elegy for Charles Inge. I can still hear his sing-song voice, reading poetry from his heart, filling the room with kindness. Without any need to impress, he only expresses sincerity, giving peace to the room. He shares a love for poetry, for life, and his wife, as his eyes seem to always caress hers. I am a better person and a poet having shared time with Charles. His spirit lives on. And then I'd like to close with a prayer for comfort for all of you.
Thank you, Sandy. That's beautiful. All right, Mike Scott. All right. Thank you, Scott.
Well, somebody needed to bring this down about 6 notches, so I'm, and I'm the guy. I feel like the little league kid that is asked to hit behind the Texas Rangers or something. I don't know, but my wife will tell you that I'm probably not going to read poetry, and I'm probably not going to talk much about art. I spent 30 years in the Navy, and I grew up in Fort Worth. And we came back here in 2006, and I ran the Chamber of Commerce here for the last 15 years. And sort of like Ken Hackett, I can't tell you for sure when I met Dominique and Charles. It just happened at some point. I suspect it had to do with the Langdon Center and the arts and some of the programs that went on and the Poet Laureate deal that you guys were doing in your backyard there. And but you know, I guess the reason you don't know for sure when you met them and you can't exactly remember is because you're so comfortable with them and they make you feel so comfortable. And I can remember Janice Horrock and I going and having lunch with the Inges, and they would always order out from someplace on the square, and we'd have lunch. And Charles always had something he was tinkering with. I don't know what, I can't remember, was it the wine, some sort of something, but anyway. But you were just totally comfortable talking about pretty much anything, you know, and Charles was such a gentleman. And he was very humble, and he was pretty quiet, although I did see him not quiet a couple of times when he and I disagreed on a couple of things, but he was still a gentleman. And I think about the things that the Inges have done for Granbury, and certainly the Inge Foundation and all that, but they're the people involved behind the scenes that you just don't always see, but you know they're out there, and you know that they're doing great things for Granbury and for Hood County, and Charles was that way. I had more in common with him, I guess, than I thought as I was watching and listening to some of the former speakers. The tubbing experience, I thought was kind of interesting. I had a tubbing experience too, but that's because I bathed in a number 2 wash tub until I was 5 years old. In fact, I still have a number 2 right here. But but I never thought about riding them down a river. That's pretty interesting. But and then I think I saw an MG in there, did I not, in the photos, or was that a Morgan? Was it? It was a Morgan. It flashed by. Yeah, okay. Flashed by quickly. And then the other thing I remembered, I guess Dominique said, well, say something funny. And I'm going, well, I think the funniest thing I ever really heard Charles talk about was how you guys met and how he courted you, and your offices near each other. And he really got excited about that, and it was interesting to listen to. And we had a lot of fun listening to it. We didn't hear the mower story, though. What happened to that? I was ready for the mower. Okay. But some of the things in Granbury that people may not know about it, and particularly the Indians were very involved in the transition of the Langdon Center with Tarleton and all of that, and keeping the Langdon Center what it was, and keeping it for the arts, and getting the city involved. And that went on for a couple of years, and Charles was very active in that. And then, of course, the Opera House reconstruction. Pretty much everything good that's happened in Granbury, you'll see the Inge's footprint somewhere on it. Art events, I already mentioned the Poet Laureate weekends at the Brazos House. They always wanted to sponsor the fireworks for the 4th of July. The Wine Walk VIP events that started in your backyard were incredible. Harvest Moon, art festivals, all those great things. And then the other thing that made me feel like we had a lot in common was, I think you spent, what, a year living on, was that a Grand Banks trawler? I thought it was a Grand Banks. 2 years. So what a wonderful time that must have been. So Charles was an amazing guy. You could sit and listen to him for hours, and as Dominique knows. So I guess I would say that I generally judge a man because of my background as to whether I would want him on my wing going into combat. And I can tell you that I'd be happy to have Charles on my wing if I was going into combat. So I'll just leave you with the fact that Charles will be sorely missed as a patron and a molder of Granbury. Pretty much everything that we see today, again, has his hoofprints on it. So may God bless the Inge family in keeping his memory and his work alive. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we have Scott Young's a friend. Where's Scott Young?
Good afternoon. Well, like Ken and Mike, I don't remember when I met Charles and Dominique either. But I'm certain that even at that first meeting, that I knew that Charles was more than just a force. He was a visionary who loved and supported Hood County, but especially the downtown historic district in which he and Dominique lived their Granbury life. He was a supporter of the arts, promoting a higher quality of life in our community. He was an historian, a philanthropist, a successful businessman who was influential even in Dallas, usually quietly and behind the scenes. He was a sculptor, often creating from driftwood washed up on his property from Lake Granbury. Often, Charles or Dominique would call me, both on the line at the same time, to discuss or express an opinion or to question something that was happening or being proposed around the historic Granbury Square. Charles was proactive and opinionated about the neighborhood in his town. He was progressive, but also a preservationist. Charles and Dominique supported many endeavors in Granbury, but most notably, I think, Langdon Center, just off the Granbury Square. He was a major supporter and contributor of the Langdon Review of the Arts in Texas. The Charles Inge I know was foremost a partner with his wife, Dominique. When I think of one of them, I also think of the other. They shared their vision of excellence, quality in all areas of life and beauty, but most importantly, their marriage. Charles had a great sense of humor and fun. He liked the British comedies on PBS Channel 13. I remember a visit Vicki and I had at the Inge home during a Christmas season. Dominique announced we're having eggnog served in Charles' grandmother's Dimitas set. As she entered the room carrying a beautiful, delicate china set, I took one look and thought, oh my God, I feel like Hyacinth Bouquet's neighbor. When I jokingly expressed that to Charles, Charles shouted out to Dominique, bring Scott a beaker. And if you don't get that, that's a throwback to the British comedies. In closing, I want to say I am blessed to have known Charles Inge, a man who made the world a better place, a brilliant man and a beacon of light, especially in Granbury. I will close with one of Charles' poems. The Courthouse Clock. The ornamented gray metallic quadrilateral tower of the courthouse can be seen from our upstairs rooms, each side with the face of a clock. One clock, four faces. A sober, durable, good old device in place from the time the great stone structure first was built. Wound weekly for all the years since. Steady and essential to the way the town lived, it could be seen and heard almost anywhere within the small community clustered around the square. It sounds muffled now, a renovation of the tower. Its soft, slow tones still count the hours, reminding us of times past, assuring us of time to come. Charles Inge, rest in peace and God's grace.
All right, thank you, Scott. And Dr. Marilyn Robitaille. She's going to read some of Charles's poems also.
Well, I had the pleasure of getting to know Charles and Dominique through our endeavors with the Langdon Review of the Arts in Texas. And we published Dominique first in the very first volume, volume 1. And we were getting ready to go to press and we were working on everything. And Charles sidled up to me and he goes, I write poetry. And we had Dominique's article about antique roses, if I recall. And so multiple occasions during the course of the next year or so, he would mention, you know, I write poetry. And so it took me a while, but by volume 3, I was reminded sufficiently, and we published Charles. And he was very careful about the order that everything was published in and just everything just so. And he wrote in the preface, I write to secure the recollection of images and perceptions which seem to me to be too precious to lose. My poems draw on the visual inspirations of the natural world, so rich here in Texas, observed through the lens of what at times seems an inner eye, seeing the connectedness of things, trying for a better understanding of what lies beneath, beyond, and behind the world in which we spend our lives. He goes on to say, I am at present several dozen poems deep into a collection to be called A Brazos View, which I would like to finish this year. It is from this collection that the following pieces were selected for the 2006-2007 Langdon Review of the Arts in Texas. So the very first time we published Charles, and we published him multiple times, but the very first time we published Charles, he picked poems. I had no say in that. He told me what poems that he wanted to put in. And this is one of the love poems that he started with. And, you know, in looking back, all of these other poems are about nature, but here's the love poem. An upper room. Roses the color of cream in a crystal vase on a glass table. Overlooking the lake, glittering back at the sun and at you and me. Music. Vivaldi resonates in the room. The air through open window sash, crisp and clean, brings sounds of water cascading down the boulders of the bluff. A moment like a dream, just for you and me as we kiss.
Thank you, Marilyn. And now Dr. Momin Kazi.
I apologize for my informal wear. I gained so much weight during the pandemic that I can't even put on a coat anymore. So I'm wearing a nicely brand new Untucked shirt for you. My name is Momin Kazi, but my nickname by my grandpa on my mom's side, who's got freckles and very fair skin and red hair, used to be red, now it's very white, but anyway, her dad, my grandpa, D.T. Haynes, used to call me Charlie because I was one of those little brown boys, Charlie Brown, and my brother was Buster Brown. But anyway, I've always been drawn to Charlies, and I think that part of that may be because I'm a Charlie. But my favorite people in the world, Charles Dickens, Charlie Brown, Charlie Robitaille. I have two friends named Charles Johnson, and then there's, of course, Charles Inge. And I've always been in love with him. I think it was his name. No, I know it was you and Charles. So I'm so delighted that you've allowed me to speak this afternoon and share one of his poems with us. And the other thing I wanted to say was just simply I've been working with Marilyn for the last 14 years on these journals, the Langdon Review of the Arts in Texas. And this last year, I culled all the journals to try to kind of get a sense of his history with Dominique on the book, that they were so vitally important in regards to the creation of being able to continue to print this book. And I wrote the bio this year. I'll just read you the last couple of sentences of that bio. Charles was first featured in Langdon Review of the Arts in Texas, Volume 3, as Marilyn alluded to, 2006-2007. Then, again, Volume 7, 2010-2011, and then last featured in Volume 13, which was 2016-2017. So he was featured a few times, and then, of course, we featured him in Volume 18 this last year in honor of his contribution to the arts, especially to this journal. He joined Dominique as a member of the Langdon Review editorial advisory board in 2008, so 13 years ago. And I think I was always kind of a little bit of a source of amusement to him. I was a professor who liked to play, I still do like to play Texas Hold'em, and he got just such a kick out of that I was a poker player because it's just so against the grain of everything I am as a very conservative person in some ways, but pretty not socially conservative, but anyway, here's a here's a poem I like to share with you that he wrote, and it reminds me the very last line. When you hear it, it might seem out of place at a memorial because it might almost seem like it goes against the grain of missing him, but think of it along the lines of, "It is well with my soul," when we sing that in the face of loss. Or like the Beatles, when Paul McCartney sang, "Let it be." He certainly wasn't saying get over it. He was saying, we'll be okay. So let's let it be, right? Setting out. Nature knows best, of course. Yet there is a bit more to it than this. Having selected some 10 years ago the best open spaces for additional trees, we set several live oaks out. Nature, so in agreement with our selections of sites, later bracketed our plantings with those of its own. And my, how these have grown, now taller, wider, and better formed, in less than half the time. When still later it comes to thinning out, as eventually now it must, what else can be said but, yes, nature does know best.
Thank you, Dr. Bowman. All right. Before we close, I'm going to close with, I want to read one of my dad's poems as well. And because one thing he said he wanted to be remembered as a poet, not for all the business and that he accomplished, but as we've heard, that was his heart and soul, and because it expressed his passion, as has been said, for life and for creation and for everything around him. And I think we can all, I'm blessed because of it. Like I said, he talked before what he showed me versus what he read to me back then is the experiences we had in nature. And so I'll be forever thankful for that. But first, I want to thank Leslie Spots for our piano, and also the First Christian Church for letting us come here on very short notice. And Heath Ramsey in the back's been wonderful helping get all this put together. So thank you, Heath, also. So, all right, if I may, I'm going to try and read this. It's entitled "Remember Me Thus," of course, by my dad. It said, "I'll watch the moon 1,000 years, and then the breeze will come with velvet touch that washes clean and floats me through the stars. Spring clover and wood fire smoke are what I'll miss the most, and wind patterns on the lake. Remember me in spring when the first green things grow, and leaf buds swell, and the fruit trees glow, and birds begin to nest. Remember me thus. The world will turn, and the sun shine, and dew will glisten on the grass. See these things, and you'll see me again." Charles Inge. All right. Would you join me in a quick prayer, please? Lord, I want to thank you for a life that has blessed and touched so many. And so, Lord, we thank you for giving us Charles Inge and for the good things we can learn from him and take to heart. Lord, I also want to thank you for every single person here, because not only have they been touched by him, but as I said earlier, we've all been touched because of the way they touched his life too. It's a give and take. And so, Lord, we all ask your blessings and your mercy. and that you bless our time as well this evening, and hopefully those who can stay, we can visit. And so we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. And if you want to hear about the lawnmower, you'll have to stay for snacks. Thank you. Something. She told me she was exercising executive privilege and she wanted to speak, and I forgot.
If that's your worst vice, you're a better man than I am a woman, so thank you. Well, it's a great joy to see you all here today, and I thank you for being here. Charles and I were married for 40 years, and during that time I was privileged to know his daily upbeat personality and his very fine wit. So I'd like to share a few little stories with you, if you don't mind. The first has to do with doilies. Yes, you heard right, doilies, D-O-I-L-I-E-S. So it was our custom every morning to take coffee together. And during that time, we would read aloud to one another a book. It could be fiction or nonfiction, but this was a very special time for us. So we would take about 30 to 40 minutes to read aloud, and it was a wonderful time because it was a book we both wanted to read, and doing it together, we could discuss aspects of it, and then we wouldn't have to wait for one to finish and go on to the next and so forth. So it was a wonderful time. Charles appreciated not only the readings, but he also appreciated a well-appointed breakfast table, which included paper doilies on the saucers underneath the coffee cups. Well, if any of you have worked with doilies, you know that those paper doilies stick together something terrible. Well, it was usually my job to separate them. One time, when the supply was running low, I purchased a new supply but had not had time to separate them. So Charles volunteered to do it. I was a little dubious because it's hard enough for a woman's fingers to separate those, but for a man's fingers, it would be pretty much impossible. Well, he was determined. So he positioned himself at the kitchen table, put on his glasses, and had this clutch of 4-inch dollies in his hand, and he was quite determined, grumbling the whole time, but he did it. Well, when he was making some progress, I complimented him on his success. He turned to me and he said, "Well, I'm doily trained." His wit was quick, it was clean, and it was always to the point. Well, on a very different occasion, it was probably early spring of 2020, and he was having a quiet lunch at the kitchen table, and my dear friend Kathy was working at the house helping me on my late mother's paperwork. Charles knew what she was working on, so he called to her and said he had something to tell her. When Kathy arrived at the table, he said, "Did Dominique tell you that her mother had an alligator farm?" Well, Kathy was shocked out of her skull, and she said, "No, she didn't tell me about that." Well, he said, "I'm surprised because she had a 1/2 undivided interest in an alligator farm." Well, Kathy is a very sincere person, and she just rankled at that. She could not believe it, but she fell for it, hook, line, and stinker. And so to this day, she still rankles. Well, caregiver Callie
overheard this conversation because she was there that day. She went home that night, came back next morning with none other than the stuffed head of a baby alligator that a friend had brought to her from Louisiana. Well, this baby alligator had a mouth open about 45 degrees, revealing all the sharp, pointed teeth, eyes bilious green underneath eyelids that looked like little Roman arches, but the teeth and the eyes were not the worst of it. It was the the scales, they were shiny, black. Why? Because they had been varnished with a high gloss varnish. Not dull, not semi-gloss, but high gloss. So this creature looked wet, like it had just come out of the swamp. And I'm telling you, it was so menacing looking, even Crocodile Dundee would have been afraid. Well, Callie had a plan. So she fixed a specially nice lunch for Charles that day, and she put that alligator head next to his plate. She took the prank a step further and wrapped his fork and knife in a napkin and put it crosswise across the alligator's mouth, so he had to reach in there to get his silverware, and he did. So we all know that vengeance, true vengeance, belongs to the Lord. But let me tell you, a little bit of human payback feels so good, really good. I have one last little story to share with you, with your indulgence. And this was years ago when Charles decided to retire from active business life. He also retired all of his suits, save one. He kept one and only one in his closet. This was a very handsome navy blue transitional weight suit that he could wear year-round. And he told me he was keeping that suit because he wanted to wear it to weddings and funerals. When I reminded him that he practically never went to weddings, he said, well, I'm really keeping it for funerals. I really like going to funerals, he said. Well, I was surprised, and I said, well, why do you like going to funerals? He said, because they make me feel so alive. Well, I do believe with your help today we have brought Charles to life a little bit, and I thank you for that.